The dress code was black tie, but the real color of the room was gold. Gilded light, gilded talk, gilded lies. My heels tapped softly across the marble as I stepped into the ballroom, late on purpose. The gala was in full swing, but I moved through it like a phantom, unannounced, unnoticed. No one expected me to come, least of all him. Harold stood center stage in every way, tall, confident, a whiskey glass in hand, his other arm brushing against her bare back as she laughed too hard at something he whispered. I recognized the dress she wore. I bought it for her last fall. I had no idea she'd wear it to charm another man, under a chandelier made of crystal and shame. There was no kiss, not yet. But the way her hand rested on his chest, the way she leaned in like he was already hers, there was no mistaking it. Though it wasn't the kind of thing you stumble into. This was rehearsed, precise, familiar. If you're listening to this and you're still here, do me one small favor, hit subscribe. Most of you forget. It helps more than you think. Like the video too. It keeps this going. Thank you. I stood still near the sponsor wall, barely breathing, no drink in hand, no expression, just my eyes, locked on the two of them. No one noticed me yet, but the night had already shifted. There was no arguing left to do, no raised voices, no desperate questions, just truth, quiet and sharp like a scalpel. A server passed me holding a tray of flutes, the crystal catching light. I didn't move. Behind me, someone laughed too loud. Ahead, my wife slipped her hand into Harold's elbow like they'd done it 100 times. I saw her lips say something. He threw his head back and laughed. She touched his lapel. Her wedding band flashed in the light and didn't stop her. I could have stormed over, could have called her name, could have shattered every glass in that place, but I didn't, because tonight wasn't for that. This wasn't the scene of a crime. It was the stage for a consequence. As the orchestra struck up the next piece, a sweeping, insincere waltz, Harold leaned in close to her. She didn't pull away, and I realized then I'd become a background character in the life I'd built. Smiling strangers, handshakes, and past hors d'oeuvres filled the space between us, but they may as well have been continents. The betrayal didn't start tonight, but it ended here, with her laughter echoing through a room of cowards and climbers, with his hand a little too low on her back, with me, watching in silence, unseen, but very much present, and with that, the first domino fell. I waited in the dark, engine off, seat pushed back just enough to vanish into the shadow. The service tunnel exit faced an alley no one respectable used, but I knew they'd come through it. People like Harold never walk through the front when they're trying to stay untraceable, and she had stopped worrying about appearances the moment she started whispering his name like a joke we'd all missed. The phone in my lap buzzed once. No caller ID, just the signal. I picked up and said it slowly, each word measured. It's active. Arkbridge. Clause 42F applies. You'll have the docs in the morning. Confirmed, came the voice. Then silence. The line dropped before I could even hang up. I didn't save the call. Didn't screen record. Didn't need to. When you've spent years planning for a situation you pray never happens, there's no hesitation when the moment comes. Just movement, just muscle memory, and there it was. Movement. At 12:08 a.m., the side door cracked open, light spilling onto the pavement. I lowered myself further into the seat. Harold stepped out first. Confident, sure-footed, careless, he looked like a man who thought he owned the night. She followed, stumbling slightly on the last step, giggling at something he whispered. He steadied her with a hand on her waist, far too familiar for mentorship. She clutched his jacket like she was 17 again, like she didn't have a husband watching from 40 feet away. I stared through the rear-view mirror, unblinking. She didn't see me, not even a flicker of recognition. And why would she? Her eyes were locked on him like nothing else existed, like I hadn't bought her that necklace she was wearing, like I hadn't stood by her when she crashed, twice, and he hadn't answered her calls until she was whole again. People don't notice what they've already discarded. Her laugh rang out as they walked toward his waiting car, his driver already holding the door open like this happened every week. Maybe it did. He said something that made her pause, hand covering her mouth like a teenager caught after curfew. Then she stepped in, her dress sliding along the leather like it belonged there. He followed. The door shut, the taillights flared. I didn't flinch, just watched as they pulled into the main road, merging into the blur of expensive machines and empty men. Inside my jacket was the original document, Clause 42F, drafted under duress during Arkbridge's acquisition of my old firm. No one ever reads the indemnity clauses, not the ones buried under moral conduct contingencies, not when they think you're just another quiet co-founder who took his buyout and disappeared. But I kept the paper, kept the original signatures, and now all I had to do was let it breathe. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need his regret. I had something better: leverage. By Thursday afternoon, the first tremor hit. It started quietly, the way all real disasters do, through an email thread marked urgent, internal only. Somewhere in Arkbridge's legal department, a junior associate flagged language no one had touched in half a decade. It was hidden deep in the acquisition file from when they bought our firm, back when they still thought acquiring people like me meant silencing people like me. Clause 42F, originally mocked as paranoid legacy language, it sat untouched, surrounded by boilerplate nestled between insurance waivers and data licensing provisions. It looked harmless, until someone asked why it had its own signature block. The compliance head called a private meeting. No agenda, no minutes, just quiet panic. They realized too late that the clause didn't care about intention. It was mechanical, triggered by one thing: the combination of public misconduct and a relationship involving a named executive and a protected spouse. I hadn't named Harold directly, but the clause didn't require it. The definition was broader: any executive with public-facing authority, any behavior compromising reputational neutrality during pending mergers. Translation: that grainy but very public photo from the gala, her laughing, hand on his chest, his mouth near her ear, wasn't just gossip, it was breach. I knew the moment it hit his radar. Friday morning, my inbox received a blind copy of a message forwarded 4 times between Arkbridge's in-house and outside counsel. No subject, just one line in the body. Was this clause ever formally amended post-acquisition? It hadn't been. Harold never bothered. His lawyer skimmed, saw my name, saw the term legacy founder, and dismissed it, said it had no real teeth. They had laughed over drinks, probably. Tucked it away with like expired medicine. Now it was poison, active, legal, binding. Across the city, inside glass offices and behind locked doors, people started whispering, not about the affair. That wasn't new, but about the clause, the paper trail, the timestamp, the implications. The merger Harold had spent 8 months lining up with the Morose Group, $1.6 billion on the line, required a clean behavioral profile for all executive leadership during the disclosure period. That was in their term sheet. I knew because I'd helped Max draft similar ones before he defected, and now Harold had to explain to his board why a romantic scandal caught on camera had triggered IP reversion language he claimed didn't exist. He didn't know it yet, but the fuse was already halfway down. And the best part? He still had no idea where the fire had started or who lit it. The message came through a shared contact, someone we both trusted enough to keep quiet. Just a first name, a number, and one short line. She wants to talk. Privately. I didn't rush to reply. Claudia Leclerc had always been a presence, not a participant. She knew her role in Harold's life: polished wife, gala-ready, quiet enough to keep investors comfortable. She wasn't naive. She knew the whispers. But knowing and seeing aren't the same. The photo changed that. It ran on the second page of a mid-tier tabloid. Blurry, unflattering, damning. Her husband, the visionary CEO, leaning in too close to a woman who wasn't her. My wife, his mouth inches from her ear, her hand on his knee, casual like it had been there 100 times. The image didn't scream scandal. It purred it. That's when Claudia stopped pretending. She texted at 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. No emojis, no sign-offs. Are you the one who triggered 42F? I stared at the screen for a long time. There was no anger in her words, no self-pity, just precision. I didn't write back. I didn't call. Instead, I opened my laptop, navigated to a shared Arkbridge calendar I still had access to through a permissions lapse no one ever noticed, and found what she needed. Suite 1908, 11:30 p.m., recurring entry, weekly. I forwarded the invite to her number with no subject, no note. The read receipt came within 30 seconds. I thought she might follow up with a call, or a demand, or a threat. She didn't. 2 nights later, I saw her again, on the cover of another tabloid, leaving a charity dinner early, alone, no ring. The reckoning had begun, and she wasn't looking for reconciliation. She wasn't interested in revenge for pain. She wanted damage, evidence, truth, leverage. She had spent years playing the gracious wife to a man who fed on public image and private indulgence, and now she wanted to know what exactly she'd been standing next to all that time. She wasn't asking me to help her. She was informing me that she already intended to act and didn't want to step on my minefield without warning. I respected that. Claudia understood something most people missed. Silence doesn't mean surrender. It means control. And now, both of us had it. Max called it insurance. I called it inevitability. We wrote the clause late one night in his loft, long after the lawyers had signed off on everything else. The formal acquisition docs had been filed. My payout was locked, but I wasn't sleeping well, not because I didn't trust the money, because I didn't trust the silence I'd been getting at home. My wife had started spending more time networking and less time explaining why Harold LeClaire's name kept popping up in her calendar. Nothing overt, just too many overlapping moments. A dinner that went longer than it should have, a weekend conference that required private briefings, the kind of patterns that only look harmless if you're not paying attention. Max didn't ask about any of that. He just watched me open a new document, titled it 42F, and said, "What's the trigger?" "Scandal," I said, "public, documented, involving my spouse and a named executive. If it meets those conditions, full IP reversion, no negotiation." He nodded. "Time limits?" "None. It lives as long as the tech does." Max cracked his knuckles and started writing. We built it like a tripwire. Hidden, silent, tied to nothing that looked urgent, just a clause in a sea of clauses, nested under moral conduct contingencies and structural IP terms. Legal teams overlook those, buried too deep to matter unless they're designed to detonate. The tech in question was mine, a logistics architecture I'd developed over 6 years, my obsession, my fingerprint, my leverage. When Arkbridge bought us, Harold wanted it badly. He wrapped it in press statements and handshakes, but I saw the hunger in his eyes. Not for the people, just the code. So I let them buy it. I just never let them own it. Max created a shell trust tied to a dormant holding company I'd set up 2 years earlier. The reversion trigger would quietly transfer the IP rights back to that entity. No sale, no payout, just ownership reverting like a snapped tether. One misstep, one confirmed scandal, that's all it would take. Max never asked what I suspected. He didn't pry into what I thought my wife might be doing or why I suddenly cared so much about retroactive asset protection. He just worked in silence. The night we finalized it, he handed me a printed copy with all the reference codes in place and said, "People think power means locking things down, but it doesn't. It means knowing where to press." I still have that page, folded, dated, initialed, because every empire, no matter how loud, how rich, how arrogant, has a pressure point. Harold just stepped on his. They convened on a Sunday. 7 board members, 2 external council reps, and Harold, half drunk, half defiant, at the head of the table. The call was labeled Urgent Ethics and Operational Review, the kind of internal panic that never leaks, because leaking would turn fire into freefall. At first, they dismissed it. Another exaggerated compliance flag, some out-of-context photo, another jealous spouse trying to stir headlines. But then the document hit the screen, Clause 42F, 5 years old. Signed by the full board, notarized during the Arkbridge Miratech acquisition, buried so deep in the asset structure, no one had read it since. Until now. It wasn't written like a threat, it was surgical. If a named executive engaged in verifiable public scandal with the legal spouse of a protected entity, me, then all shared and licensed intellectual property originating from said spouse's holdings would revert immediately, permanently. There was no expiration date, no arbitration clause, no buyback option. And worse, what reverted wasn't trivial. The clause referenced one core element, a predictive logistics engine currently running the back end for over half of Arkbridge's global partners. Transit, supply chain, digital mapping, real-time rerouting, contracts with defense contractors, state-level emergency response networks, and 2 foreign governments. It was their spine. Harold's voice cracked when he tried to spin it. This was back when we needed their IP. It was leverage. No one ever thought this would activate, but it had. The press had already picked up the story. The image of him and my wife wasn't just suggestive. It was time-stamped, sourced, and authenticated. One firm had already paused contract renewal pending governance clarification. The board asked how quickly it could be amended. It couldn't. The clause was a one-time trigger. Once activated, it operated like a kill switch. Max had designed it to transfer ownership without profit, just pure reversion, meaning I couldn't resell the tech, couldn't license it, couldn't cash in. That's what stunned them most. I didn't want money, I wanted it back. They couldn't sue me for reclaiming what was already mine. There were no damages, no profit motive, just the quiet collapse of their critical infrastructure and the reputational explosion tied to the fact they let their CEO sleepwalk into a legal landmine for personal reasons. The moment Harold realized he couldn't buy his way out, he stood up too fast and knocked over his glass. It shattered. No one flinched. By Monday morning, 3 partners had suspended access to the platform. ArcBridge's tech lead went dark, and compliance was forced to report the event to the SEC to preempt a penalty. I wasn't suing. I wasn't bargaining. I was reclaiming, and that made it worse, because nothing is more dangerous to a man who defines himself by control than someone who doesn't want anything from him at all. The invitation came in the form of an embossed envelope, hand-delivered, no secrecy this time, no silent entrances or backdoor appearances. I was listed publicly now, seated at table 4, same row as 2 board members and the head of compliance. No one questioned it, not anymore. ArcBridge couldn't afford to cancel the gala. Doing so would have announced to investors, partners, and press that the rumors were true, that the CEO had compromised not just his image but the company's backbone. So they leaned into illusion, dressed it all up in glass and silver, pretended nothing was burning behind the curtains. Claudia and I arrived just after 7. She wore navy, not black, not red, nothing to make her a statement, just elegance, unapologetic. Her arm curled lightly through mine, not possessive, not performative, intentional. The valet took our coats with quiet reverence. A photographer turned his camera. Claudia didn't smile. Neither did I. The flash clicked anyway. Inside, the ballroom looked unchanged. Gold fixtures, candlelit centerpieces, the same tired jazz quartet trying to sound lively. But the eyes had changed. People watched us from behind champagne flutes pretending not to. And then I saw her. My wife stood near the terrace, champagne in hand, flanked by Harold's head of marketing and someone from PR. Her dress was a shade too bold for her usual taste, something she'd picked for him, not for herself. She spotted us mid-laugh and stopped mid-sip. Her hand didn't lower. Her mouth just parted slightly. She didn't blink. Harold came toward us before she could. He looked older, not tired, thinned, like someone hollowed out from the inside, but still trying to hold a pose. "Cute stunt," he said, not bothering with a greeting. "Claudia, really?" She didn't answer, just turned slightly toward me, unbothered. I reached into my jacket, pulled out a folded single page, and handed it to him. "Clause 42F, I said, quiet but clear. "Trigger confirmed. Effective noon today. Compliance has the notarized packet." He opened it too fast, hands a little shaky, eyes scanning. His jaw flexed. Behind him, 2 board members stepped forward, subtle but unmistakable. I saw one of them glance at the document, then at Harold. "That clause was neutralized," he said without conviction. "No," Claudia replied, her voice calm. "It was neglected. Not the same thing." Harold tried to speak, but nothing landed. Not in front of them, not with her beside me, not with his board watching. My wife hadn't moved, still near the terrace, still staring like the entire room had flipped on its axis and she was the only one without a script. This time, I didn't look away, I didn't gloat, didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. I just stood still, invited, composed, impossible to unsee. Harold folded the page, his hands now visibly trembling. He turned toward the bar. No one followed. The room didn't shift with noise. It shifted with stillness. One of those slow, tightening moments where no one wants to be the first to breathe wrong. A board member I hadn't met before, graying temples, sharp eyes, stepped closer. He glanced at the page still clenched in Harold's hand, then looked at me with something between curiosity and disbelief. Who approved this clause? He asked, quiet but audible enough to cut through the string quartet's attempt at atmosphere. Harold opened his mouth, but no words came. He blinked twice, stammered once. That was years ago. It wasn't, before legal even. No, Claudia said, her voice like a blade drawn in daylight. I reviewed it and signed it as majority spouse during that acquisition. Her words dropped into the space like a guillotine. Clean. Irrevocable. Harold froze. The board member beside him turned, just slightly, but enough. And in that gesture, the dynamic cracked wide open. She had been beside him in every acquisition, every keynote, every photo op meant to signal strength. But she wasn't behind him now. She stood beside me. Claudia took a measured breath, then turned toward me. Not for applause, not for recognition, just clarity. Thank you for the heads up, she said. I nodded once. Across the room, my wife had stepped forward slightly, unsure. Her face had drained of color. She looked from me to Claudia, then to Harold. Nothing made sense to her anymore. The men she thought she understood, one a golden ticket, the other disposable, were no longer in their assigned roles. She had backed the wrong mask. Harold's lips parted like he wanted to speak, to grab control, but no one was listening to him now. Even the PR director had edged backward, phone in hand, waiting for some unspoken signal to disengage. The silence grew. Not awkward, absolute. The kind of silence that tells you something permanent just changed, and there's no speech or spin that can undo it. Harold had built empires on calculated risk, market manipulation, strategic charm, but he never protected the one thing that could undo him in a single sentence, his wife's loyalty. And tonight, she wasn't standing in his shadow. She was standing in mine. The flashes started the second we turned toward the staircase. They weren't from press, at least not official ones, but phones were up, screens glowing, faces lit in that half-curious, half-predatory way people wear when something expensive is unraveling in front of them and they want proof they were there to watch it burn. I kept my pace even. Claudia matched it. Behind us, Harold's voice cut through the noise, sharp, ragged, laced with something he hadn't felt in years. Desperation. Claudia, wait. He moved quickly, clumsily, catching up just as we reached the edge of the hall. His hand reached for her wrist. She didn't flinch. She turned to him like a statue coming to life, quiet, unshaken. Then stepped in, leaned close, and whispered something directly into his ear. I watched his face change in real time. First confusion, then shock, then that hollow recognition when a man realizes too late that he's been looking at the surface of things for years and the real decisions were made below it. She stepped back, eyes locked on his for half a second, then turned and walked with me through the archway, through the hushed crowd, and out into the night. We didn't speak until we were in the car, engine idling, heat rising slowly into the cabin like the last breath of something buried. Outside, Harold stood in the portico light, still holding the document, still pretending he had time to fix something. Inside, Claudia leaned back and stared straight ahead. You didn't do this for me, she said quietly. No, I replied. I did it for me. You just chose your moment. She nodded once, not agreement, not approval, just understanding. Because the truth was, I hadn't planned for her part in it. I hadn't counted on her stepping out of his shadow and into the silence beside me. I hadn't expected grace from someone who'd watched from the sidelines so long, but she stepped anyway, without spectacle, without apology. And now we sat in a car that wasn't an escape vehicle. It was just the first place we didn't owe anyone an explanation. Behind us, Arkbridge still stood, its lights still shone, its brand still gleamed, but the foundation was cracked now and everyone saw it. The board, the staff, the ones who thought Harold was untouchable. Turns out, empires don't fall all at once. Sometimes they just start leaking, and sometimes that's enough. The envelope was cream-colored and creased at the corners, no return address, just my name, written in a handwriting I hadn't seen in months but recognized instantly. Round letters, soft pressure, too neat to be spontaneous. Inside, 3 pages. Not an apology, not really. just a recounting of feelings, timelines, and carefully arranged guilt. She wrote about feeling invisible, about how Harold made her feel seen, about how it just happened and got complicated. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't mention the gala. She didn't ask how I knew. I folded the letter once and set it aside, untouched since. Then I unlocked the drive. The folder had been labeled Auto Backup Study Cam. I hadn't looked at it in real time. I hadn't needed to. But that night, I let the clips play. The grainy black and white footage showed her at my desk, phone on speaker, talking to a friend I never liked, and now understood why. The tone was smug, bragging, one hand flipping through my old receipts, the other swirling a glass of wine. He thinks I'm at the gym. She laughed. Honestly, it's almost too easy. Harold's already talking about Europe in the fall. Another clip. Different day. Same room. She was rehearsing what she'd say if I found out. Pausing. Smiling. Rewording her lines out loud like they were part of a school play. I mean, it's not like he was ever exciting, she said. He's steady, boring. Harold says women like me shouldn't settle for predictable just to feel safe. That word, safe, hit harder than I expected, not because she used it, but because I once believed it meant something sacred, protected, chosen. She saw it as a cage. I didn't watch the rest. I didn't save the files to another drive and didn't forward them, didn't upload them anonymously, no leaks, no viral revenge, because the damage was already done, not by scandal, not by gossip, by the truth landing exactly where it needed to, in contracts, in witness statements, in notarized signatures, in a woman named Claudia standing silently by my side while his entire board turned on him in tailored suits and forced smiles. I didn't need a courtroom. I didn't need the internet. I needed one thing, to know that the people who thought they were invincible finally understood they weren't, and that sometimes the deepest cuts don't bleed loud, they just never heal.